cares and calls you back. Shows up and finishes on time. 287-2829. Code Red Roofers, the roofers who respond. Now here's the First Alert meteorologist.
Your WPTV First Alert forecast. This afternoon, highs in the mid to upper 80s with scattered showers and storms focused around the lake. But still can't rule out the chance for a shower or thunderstorm to spill over into the coast later into the day. Tomorrow, drier conditions with rain chances going down, highs in the upper 80s. By Friday, highs in the upper 80s, some afternoon showers and storms possible. For the weekend, highs in the upper 80s to low 90s, scattered late-day showers and storms possible, and slightly cooler conditions as we head into early next week. I'm WPTV First Alert meteorologist Katya Hall for WSTU 1450, Martin County's Heritage Station.
It's time now for the Casey Ingram Show on WSTU. The opinions expressed are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WSTU. WSTU does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WSTU. It's time to call in with your questions and comments at 220-9788, 220-WSTU. And now, here's Casey Ingram.
Good morning, and it's good to be back here on the Treasure Coast. We have another fabulous day here, and it's beautiful, sunny. We're heading into the rainy season, of course, but we still have our wonderful days. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about my sponsors. We have, of course, the hurricane season that will be right around the corner, and it's so important that you realize that. And, think about Indiantown Marina. Indiantown Marina is really one of South Florida's very best boat storage facilities. They're located inland on the Okeechobee Waterway, and they're a very, very well-protected hurricane hull. In my opinion, it's probably the safest hurricane hull you're going to find here on the Treasure Coast. And not only that, they're a do-it-yourself boat yard. So if you have work that needs to be done on your boat, you can have it done there. Electrical, mechanical, bottom painting, you name it. They can do it all, do it yourself, or hire somebody. But folks, I'm just going to stress this. Now is the time to reserve your hurricane storage. Once a storm is named, you're probably not going to find a place anywhere on the coast. So have peace of mind that when a hurricane comes, you know you have a place to keep your boat. Give the good folks at Indiantown Marina a call at 772-631-3272, 772-631-3272. And also, you have to visit the best kept secret in Martin County. Where is that? Well, it's the Fish House Art Center, and it's in the Pocket, which we call Port Salerno. TheFishHouseArtCenter.com. You can check them out online before you head out, but you can come by boat, car, or stroll the boardwalk to explore what the best kept secret has to offer. Features local artists, an Airbnb, art gallery, boat charters, marina, craft and creamery. There's craft beers, wine, 24 flavors of ice cream, literally something for everybody in the family. You can rent bikes, you can rent pedal boards, just all kinds of things out there. So visit the Fish House Art Center. They're down in the Pocket, Port Salerno, and a really, really fun place to take your friends or just take your family. And finally, COVID, unexpected expenses, illnesses. There are many issues that can cause your successful business to slump deep into the red. We are here to help, and we only get paid if we provide you a workout. Debt restructuring is complicated, and we are the negotiator between you and your creditors. Commercial Mortgage has been in the industry of small balance corporate finance since 2003. Our focus is on challenging corporate foreclosures, debt restructures, equity, and new debt solutions. These issues are often not easy to see or understand when you run a business and are faced with multifaceted debt challenges that include legal action on various fronts. That's where we come in. We never charge a front fee or deposit. We're only paid if we successfully provide you a debt workout. Areas of expertise are hotels, marinas, office buildings, restaurants, apartments, multifamily, condos, golf courses, home builders, and land development, including new and repurposed developments. Call Commercial Mortgage, LLC at 772-872-6099, 872-6099, or visit them online, commercialmortgagellc.com. So everybody, today we have another great show on tap here, and I can take questions or comments on the Facebook live feed if you go to Casey Ingram Show on Facebook, and you can join the conversation that way. But today we have Mr. Bob Inglis. He is the Executive Director for RepublicEn, EN.org. Mr. Inglis is the Executive Director of RepublicEn.org. He was elected to the U.S. Congress in 1992, having never run for office before. He represented Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina from 93 to 98, unsuccessfully challenged U.S. Senator Fritz Hollings in 98, and then returned to the practice of commercial real estate law in Greenville, South Carolina. In 2004, he was reelected to Congress and served until losing the primary reelection in 2010. In 2011, Mr. Inglis went full-time into promoting free enterprise action on climate change and launched the Energy and Enterprise Initiative at George Mason University in July 2012. In the fall of 2014, Energy and Enterprise Initiative rebranded to become RepublicEn.org. RepublicEn is a growing grassroots community of over 10,000 Americans educating the country about free enterprise solutions to climate change. The organization is a nonprofit 501c3 hosted at the George Mason University Foundation and educates, recruits, and organizes conservative voices for action on climate change. For his work on climate change, Inglis was given the 2015 John F. Kennedy Profile Encourage Award. He appears in the film Merchants of Doubt and in the Showtime series Years of Living Dangerously, episodes 3 and 4. And he's spoken at TEDx Beacon Street and TEDx Jacksonville. Inglis was a resident fellow at Harvard University's Institute of Politics in 2011, visiting energy fellow at Duke University's Nicholas School of Environment in 2012, and resident fellow at the University of Chicago's Institute of Politics in 2014. Mr. Inglis grew up in the low country of South Carolina, went to Duke University for college, and he met and married his college sweetheart, graduated from the University of Virginia School of Law, and practiced commercial real estate law in South Carolina before and between his years in Congress. And today, Mr. Inglis, the Executive Director of RepublicEn, is joining us by phone, and we're excited to hear a lot more about this organization. Mr. Inglis, are you on the line with us?
I am. Good to be with you, Casey. Thank you.
Truly my pleasure. I've been really looking forward to this show because I think conservatives, Republicans in general, are branded as anti-environmentalist and anti-climate change. So you're kind of here to say we're here as conservatives, and we do care about environment. We do care about climate change. We understand there are things on this planet we can do as a society and people. And tell us a little bit more about RepublicEn, why you started it, and why the focus on conservatives.
Yeah, well, it's great to be with you, and I wish you could be in person, because you're in a beautiful spot, so I wish I could be there with you.
But we are. We're right off the banks of the St. Lucie River, Mr. Inglis. I wish you were here, too. Stewart's a wonderful town, and I have to brag a second. It's been, voted the happiest city here in the country a couple times, so we would love to have you if you come to visit.
Isn't that great?
It really is.
Wow, that's the happiest city. That's a great recommendation right there.
Absolutely.
It's both my parents grew up in Jacksonville, so I spent a long time in Florida. And if you've ever heard of a place called Inglis, Florida, that was my great grandfather actually.
Oh my goodness!
Founded that town.
Well, you have to tell me where it's at because I haven't heard of it. So.
Inglis is on the Gulf Coast, basically where the beaches stop and the marshes start, and it's where the Homosassa River comes out.
Yes.
And it's near Yankeetown, and so anyhow,
absolutely.
That's some ancient history right there. But he was actually a pioneer in Florida when it was. He came in the 1850s. So But about current events, Casey, we're the RepublicEn.org, and the idea is it's EN for energy, entrepreneurship, the environment. It's basically the idea is to show the power of free enterprise in solving the challenge of climate change. And it's sort of understandable why conservatives have felt a little bit uncomfortable in the climate conversation up until now, because the assumed solution has been a bigger government that regulates our very breath. Well, that's not real attractive to conservatives. So what we talk about is solutions that don't involve those kind of big government approaches, but rather an actually quite small government approach that just brings accountability for the side effects of the burning of fossil fuels to products. And the result would be really a free enterprise bonanza of innovation. So that's what. So we're out to change the kind of conversation so that conservatives feel comfortable and say, yeah, you know what? If that's what you're talking about, well, we're really good at that.
Right.
So what conservatives aren't so good at is regulations. We sort of break out in hives and start itching all over when you say something about regulations. But if you're talking about free enterprise and the power of innovation, that's our story. That's our song.
It truly is when it comes to conservatives, and they always say that, ingenuity and necessity is the mother of ingenuity, and certainly we do need ingenuity in terms of our climate change issues here. And Mr. Inglis, I want to touch base a little bit and just backtrack a minute with climate change. There's always the argument. What is climate change? Is it really happening? There's voices on both sides of the issue. Is this just something that happens naturally, that we go through heat waves? Back in the 70s, they said we're going to global cooling and going to have issues that way, but then it turned around and we're warming again. So I think that it's an interesting organization that you have, because there's a lot of discussion with climate change, and you have to overcome the necessity for that ingenuity.
Yeah, and I reflect what you're just saying, because I was on the other side of this. For my first 6 years in Congress, I said that climate change was nonsense. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. And in as much as I represented a very conservative district in South Carolina, Greenville-Spartanburg, South Carolina, that was the end of the inquiry for me.
Right.
Okay, I admit that's sort of ignorant, but that's the way it was for my first 6 years in Congress. Then I was out of Congress for 6 years doing commercial real estate law, as you said earlier, and then I got the opportunity to run for the same seat again in 2004. And that was the year that our son, the eldest of our 5 kids, just turned 18, so he was voting for the first time. And he came to me and he said, "Dad, I'll vote for you. You're going to clean up your act on the environment." His 4 sisters agreed. His mother agreed. That's a new constituency. Those people can change the locks on the doors to your house. You need to respond to those people. And so,
very true.
So, and by the way, my son was going to vote for me no matter what, right? But he knew we could lose by 1 vote. It wasn't in his economic interest to vote against me.
There you go.
He was in college, just started college. He needed me to win that race, and because we were literally mortgaging the farmette that we live on in order to run for Congress. So I think it was really saying, "Dad, I love you.
Right.
You can be better than you were before. So how about make this English 2.0, the new and improved version?" And so that was step 1 of a 3-step metamorphosis. Step 2 was going to Antarctica with a science committee and seeing the evidence in the ice core drillings.
Yeah.
And this gets right to your question.
That was right about 2005, right?
Yeah, is that what you see in Antarctica is an amazing record of the Earth's atmosphere in the ice. So here's a fun fact to know and tell. We're talking about the beauty of Stewart, Florida, and a nice environment there. Pretty tougher environment down at the South Pole, but here's an interesting thing to know. It's a desert. It gets 1/4 of an inch of precipitation a year. And it's 10,000 feet above sea level at the South Pole. So it's 5,000 feet of dirt and then 5,000 feet of ice on top of that.
Wow.
And so in that 5,000 feet of ice, since it accumulates only at 1/4 of an inch of precipitation a year, it's an amazing record of the Earth's atmosphere. And so the scientists drill down through the ice, they pull up the cores, they fly them off to freezers at the Byrd Polar Research Center at Ohio State, and then they study the ice. And what it shows is stable levels of CO2, and then it starts increasing when the Industrial Revolution comes, which just sort of makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, it's like, before that, we were chopping trees and heating our houses with firewood and cooking our food that way. But then comes the Industrial Revolution, and we started to go deep in the earth and pull up trees long gone, and under time and temperature and pressure turned into fossil fuels, petroleum, natural gas, coal. Bring those to the surface and burn them, we're changing the chemistry of the air. And nobody disputes that, by the way. Not even the most ardent disputer of climate change disputes that, because it really is pretty indisputable. It's just reality. And then the physics of light, which have been known since the 1800s, are that, sun gives us all this light. It strikes the earth, creates heat. All that heat doesn't go back into space because of the presence of greenhouse gases. And we're thankful for that, because if it did, we'd burn up in the day and freeze at night. So it moderates our temperature. But if you add more, then you get some warming. And so that's what we're seeing. Where the disputing comes, and to your question, is in the modeling of that. Because what we're asking the scientists to do is create models that show us the future of the entire Earth's atmosphere. Well, that's hard.
Right.
That's and you can have you make assumptions in those models, and you change those assumptions a little bit, and you get different results. And that's where the disputing comes. But the basics, the chemistry and the physics, nobody disputes. And so it's sort of like this, the thing that you mentioned hurricanes earlier, and, can you predict right now the hurricanes for this season? Answer, no. But you see that perhaps conditions could be right for the formation of hurricanes. And that's sort of the way climate change is. You don't, based on the chemistry and the physics I was just describing, we know, for example, that the water is coming up, whether it's in Stewart or whether it's in my hometown of Bluffton, South Carolina. The water's coming up. The scientists believe that it's about a foot by 2050, which is a lot of sea level rise.
It is, and we've all seen those graphics where Miami, here we are in South Florida, Miami is going to be, most of it's going to be underwater, and there's a lot of places here in the United States, but they're frightening graphics.
Yeah, and then you have people say, well, no, maybe it's not. You change that model a little bit, and it's 8 inches, it's not 12 inches.
Right.
Change it a little bit the other way, and it goes 16 inches, not 12 inches. But here's the thing, whether it turns out to be like 12 inches in Bluffton, South Carolina, and 8 inches in Stewart, not 12 as predicted, it could be that way, because the way that the Gulf Stream is closer, I believe, to Stewart than it is to Bluffton. And Bluffton, we're about 70 miles. It goes 70 miles out to get to the Gulf Stream.
Right.
And so, that sort of sucks water down as it speeds past. And so it may keep Stewart's sea level rise a little bit lower than Bluffton's. That's the kind of complexity that the scientists are being asked to do, and that gets hard. But in the main, the water's coming up. So so anyway, that's a long explanation of your question about how, there is some disputing about the modeling.
Well, Mr.
The
Inglis,
basics of it are pretty agreed upon.
I think that you've brought up some really good points here. And that's something that, as we're talking about here in the future, there's things that you looked at, and thank you for the information you gave us on Antarctica. I had no idea there was so little rainfall, and we, have, 5,000 years.
5,000 feet of ice that has a record of the Earth's atmosphere. It's really pretty amazing.
That's absolutely incredible. And you could see how, as the world changed and has as humans change, the Industrial Revolution, you saw different changes in that ice. We don't know what the future is going to bring either as far as what our inventions are. What we do know is everything that affects us, every change, there's going to be another effect on the world. I mean, every time you change something, there's going to be an effect. So we don't know if it's good or bad, but everything causes something else to change when you disrupt whatever it is, and that may be through inventions. It's just humans being here working. I mean, you can go with any type of product on that saying. There's going to be a change, and it's absolutely incredible that you're telling us the complexity of these future models, because not only is it how you model it, but we don't know what the future looks like exactly in 50 years. What inventions will be here? Whoever thought that cars would be, going 60 miles per gallon or more, but they're there.
Yeah.
A lot of things are changing. So it's hard to take those things into account without knowing what the future comes in. So I can see where this is a really tough topic for you folks, to address. And there is no absolute answers. We just have to kind of take our best guess today. And this kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation where you were talking about ingenuity.
It sounds like that's why, Casey, you must be on the air in the happiest city in America because of the optimism that you're showing there. It's about inventiveness of human beings and figuring out how to solve problems. I'm reminded of President Kennedy's speech at American University. In fact, I've just looked it up here. I don't know these words from memory, but I've just looked it up because you were just expressing his kind of optimism. He says that our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man. And that's the big thing. If this is a man-made problem, and it appears to be, well, that's really good news.
It's something
because, otherwise, as a friend of mine, David Frum, says, we better hope it's human caused, because if it is, we can solve it. To pick up on President Kennedy's words, our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man.
Very eloquent way to say that, and simple and easy to understand, and I agree with it 100%.
Yeah, and it's the kind of optimism, really, that needs to be expressed in the climate space, because too often this conversation, another reason that conservatives have generally sort of shied away from the climate conversation, I mentioned earlier the regulatory approach, which is unnatural to us, and the other is this sort of doom and gloom that we're all going to die next Tuesday.
Right.
And, well, if that's the case, let's eat, drink, and be merry between now and Tuesday. But if you're telling me that we can do something about it, and that actually we can innovate and create new stuff that solves the problem, and by the way, creates jobs and wealth in the process, such that we sell this stuff to happy customers around the world and make money.
That's right.
Wow, that's a pretty great thing. Let's get at it. Rather than, oh no, we're all doomed. We got to repent of the capitalistic system. We got to walk and eat bugs.
Right.
We're all going to die.
Right.
Well, if that's what you're talking about, well, no wonder conservatives haven't been in the conversation. So at RepublicEn.org, we live to say, no, change that around. This is an
100%.
Opportunity. Let's get at it.
And where there's a need, there is somebody out there trying to solve that issue. We are on the phone with former Representative Bob Inglis. He is the Executive Director, founder of RepublicEn.org. That's RepublicEn.org. And we're going to be back shortly right after this break. We've got a lot more to talk about with Mr. Bob Inglis. We'll be right back.
Ingram Show.
You are listening to WSTU, Stewart, Jensen Beach, Hope Sound, Martin County's Heritage Station.
You're listening to The Casey Ingram Show on WSTU Digital 1450. Call in with questions and comments at 220-9788. 220-WSTU. And now back to the show.
On the phone, we have former Congressman Bob Inglis, and he is the executive director, founder of RepublicEn. We are energy optimist and climate realist. Members of RepublicEn are conservatives, libertarians, pragmatists, of diverse political opinions. And we just talked a little bit about accountability and free enterprise are the best ways to solve climate change, Mr. Inglis. And you talked about the EN. It's in your name. It's ingenuity, it's engineering, it's finding ways to solve climate change. And you just said a very eloquent quote from President Kennedy, and it really sums things up. You know, things that are, I don't have it in front of me, so I can't say it verbatim. I should let you say it, if you would.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's an American University speech, you know, where he's talking really about peace, but it applies to climate change. He says, too many, he says, too many of us think it's impossible. Too many think it unreal. That's a dangerous defeatist belief, he says. It leads to a conclusion that war, or climate change, we change it to here,
right,
is inevitable, that mankind is doomed, that we are gripped by forces we cannot control. And then he says, we need not accept that view. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man.
100% applicable. 100%.
I didn't do that as well as he did it, you understand, Casey, but you know
works.
what I mean.
It works. You did just fine.
I mean, it's, you know, I tell you, when I get discouraged in this business, and sometimes it is discouraging, I go and watch another of President Kennedy's speech. It's the Moonshot speech, September 1962 at Rice University. 17 minutes of pure American exceptionalism. He admits in the speech that some of the materials needed for the spacecraft to go to the moon hadn't been invented yet. No matter, we're going to the moon before the decade is out. And so it just had this incredible belief in the American people. And so what I say is that when leaders are optimistic, they're saying they believe in the people they represent. You know, if you're possessed of all kinds of doom and gloom, you must not believe in the people you represent.
Right.
But if what President Kennedy showed in that Moonshot speech in September of '62 at Rice was, he had incredible faith in the American people. We're going to do it. We're going to beat the Soviets to the moon because we've got to. And so it's really pretty inspiring. So when I get discouraged, I go watch that speech, and Casey, I cry every time because it's the most amazing speech of just this optimism and determination. And by golly, if we didn't do it, we did it. We went to the moon before the decade was out. It's just...
We did.
I know now, looking back, sure, yeah, we did that. But, you know, I was on the science committee, as I mentioned earlier, and one time the flight surgeon from that Apollo mission came by the science committee. And I mentioned to him in the hallway, I said, is it true that we didn't know how deep the moon dust was? And he grabbed me by the arm and he took me aside. He was so excited. He's a man at that point in his 80s. And he was so excited somebody sort of knew that story. He said, yeah, let me tell you. Those were my patients. I was monitoring their heartbeats. There was a real chance that they were going to fly into their graves. We had no idea how deep the moon dust was. And so he was just excited that somebody knew that, yeah, that was the case. We had no idea. But as God would have it, you know, the thrusters came on, a little bit of dust was blown away. The Eagle landed securely. And by the way, Neil Armstrong, he told me, turned off the rudimentary computer that was supposed to land it because Neil Armstrong was a test pilot. And he said, if I'm flying into my grave, I'm flying it myself.
Wow.
So it's like,
wow,
that's the kind of I mean, just imagine we did that. I mean, we did that on slide rules.
Right.
Slide rules. I
Right.
mean, you have to be old enough to remember what a slide rule was, but, that's how we designed that spacecraft. And so, given that, and what we've got a challenge now in climate change, let's get at it. We can do it.
And we don't have
did
to.
it to the moonshot.
I was going to say, we don't have to fly to the moon to solve it either. It's right here on our own planet. Mr. Inglis, just listening to you speak, this is very inspirational. I'm listening to your stories, and I'm sure my listeners are just as inspired as I am. And, we can do this. We can. When you talk about the perils they overcame going to the moon and the unknowns they had to deal with, that's a story I had not heard before. They didn't realize what they were stepping into, how deep that moon dust could be. And as you talk about it, I'm like, you're right. How would you know?
Yeah, there's no way to know it.
No, nobody had been there. So,
and the whole with the whole world watching, Casey, those astronauts could have died.
Right.
The whole world, and we would have been a colossal failure.
Devastating. Yes.
But it didn't happen that way.
No.
God would have it, like I said, a little bit of dust blew away, it landed.
American ingenuity succeeded.
Yeah.
And to this end, you're actually, it's very inspirational what you're doing. It's inspirational, the message that you're spreading, but you're also taking field trips with many members of Congress. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And one of them is Congressman Byron Donalds. He's over on the other side, over in Naples, but we're very familiar with him here on the Treasure Coast as well. And, tell us a little bit about these field trips and what are you seeing as far as their reactions and what are they walking away with to take back to other members of Congress?
Yeah, so it's a great trip we had recently with, just 2 weeks ago, with Byron Donalds, out to see a barrier island and to talk especially about water quality and inundation from sea level rise, those kinds of things. What these field trips are about is what Newt Gingrich used to tell us. He used to say that what we need to follow is the listen, learn, help, lead model, which is you go out and you listen, you learn, you help, and then you're qualified to lead. And so what the idea of these field trips is to give members of Congress like Byron Donalds the opportunity to do just that, to go out and listen to experts in this case, to learn about it, to show you're wanting to help, and then it prepares you to lead. And so we went out to see this island and talked on the way about the fact that Naples, is about 3 feet above sea level. So that foot that we were talking about earlier, that's a lot.
Very
when
impactful.
You're only 3 feet above sea level.
Right.
And the thing that I did not know, Casey, until this trip, it was really quite an eye-opener for me, was that when you're that low and the sea level is coming up, at high tide, there are an awful lot of septic tanks and drain fields that are inundated by both seawater coming up and pushing the groundwater up.
Right.
To the point that those septic tanks and drain fields are not functioning properly. And of course, then when the tide goes down and moves to low tide, it basically pulls the stuff in the drain field. We won't go into what the stuff is, but
people
pulls
know.
the stuff
Right.
Out into the waterway. Now you've got a polluted waterway.
That's right.
And you've got fish kill, and you've got oysters struggling, and you've got oysters struggle for a different reason: heat and salinity or acidity of the ocean water.
Right.
But you have some fish kill, and that's really. We had another earlier. We had a wonderful trip with Maria Salazar on Biscayne Bay, and you can see this on our website at RepublicEn.org. You look under events, and then there'll be a whole category of field trips. And there's a great quote from Maria Salazar, who said, "What comes from the land ends up in the water," and she really summarized it that way. And so the thing that we sort of learned in the Byron Donalds trip is that what we put in the air and what we do on the land ends up in the water. And so that's the result of, just what we're talking about here is human activity that's doing some stuff that, okay, then now that we know, let's change that. Let's improve it. Let's figure out a way to do more advanced septic systems. And while we're at it, let's also try to figure out how to keep some of that sea level rise from happening. And that's, like we were talking about earlier, that's a problem of human creation, therefore it has a human solution.
That's right. So much of this is, you were talking about what Representative Donalds was telling you about what happened with the water quality, salinity, the flooding, the septic tanks, the drain fields, flooding into the waterways. We have the same issues here on the East Coast, and I appreciate him showing that to you. But a lot of this stuff is man-made, the septic tanks. The Okeechobee Waterway is a man-made canal that was dug in the 1930s. The water didn't used to discharge to the east and west because that canal wasn't there. So, all of this stuff is man-made. Your organization, a couple questions here. What is the end goal as far as completely understand and agree that ingenuity is going to solve our issues here in the future? And American ingenuity, that's one thing our country, it's what has made us great. And is it to make Congress people realize they need to support ingenuity, whether it's, supporting those businesses, make sure we don't tax them out of existence? Or is it just to open the eyes of conservative membership that, climate change is a real thing and it is solvable, but we need to understand it's a real thing and support those that are trying to solve it in order for us to get there?
That's a great statement right there. Is that that last part, that what we do at RepublicEn.org is we try to build a constituency of support for action. Say, yeah, it's real, let's do something about it, and we'll support you, our members of Congress and senators, as you engage on this. Because members of Congress look for permission from their constituents to lead. Really, it's up to us to give them that permission. To say, yeah, we'll follow you. We need you to lead on this, and we'll follow you. And so that's our main thing. And then as to what specifically how to get it done, Casey, there are really three options. You can try to regulate CO2. Well, I just told you earlier, we're not so into that because we're not so into regulations. And by the way, even if we weren't conservatives who didn't really cotton to regulations, we'd notice a problem with it, which is you can't regulate Chinese emissions from here in America.
Right.
And if you regulate here, and they don't regulate there, and manufacturers pick up and move from here to there, well, they're going to emit more CO2 when they get there than they were emitting here because we're way more energy efficient than China. And so you actually could go downhill on solving climate change. Second approach is to incentivize clean energy, buy some tax credits. If I were still in Congress, I'd vote for these things. Expanded wind and solar credits, for example. But I'd be worried that they might not go worldwide. So like that regulatory approach, might not go worldwide because you can incentivize American corporations through the American tax code. You can't incentivize Chinese corporations through the American tax code. They don't pay American taxes. So those incentives might not work worldwide. They might not get us innovation worldwide because here in rich America, and we are rich. I mean, compared to the rest of the world, we are very rich.
Yes, we are.
We may not all feel rich, but we are very rich compared to the rest of the world. So those incentives will work here. But in places that are less well off, if they can't adopt our technology, we might just not be getting there. We might be not solving the worldwide problem. So then the third approach, the one that we're big on at RepublicEn.org, and by the way, you can see all this at our website, RepublicEn.org, under the resources tab, you'll see this whole thing I'm describing here. A third approach, one that we are big on, is just bringing accountability for the side effects of burning fossil fuels to all products. So, give you an example. On that Maria Salazar field trip, we went to Publix ahead of time to get some sandwiches for the boat and needed some utensils, found some plastic forks. And in the future, if we get our way here of bringing accountability to all products through some sort of carbon pricing mechanism, and that would be probably a carbon tax that's, by the way, cut taxes somewhere else in equal amounts so there's no growth of government. So we're conservatives. We don't want to grow government here.
Right.
So if you do that carbon tax, those plastic forks will have a competitor right next to them on the public shelf. It'll be a wooden spork, and it'll be some guy or gal in South Georgia growing loblolly pines and harvesting them every 20 years or so and turning them into sporks. And on the shelf at Publix, in the future, when you look at the plastic fork, it now has all accountability for the side effects of the fossil fuels built into it, because a carbon tax has now had to been paid by the manufacturer of that stuff. It'll be more expensive because it's dirtier. Dirty made accountable will be more expensive than renewable, which will be and cleaner, which will appear cheaper on that shelf. So if you want plastic, go ahead and pay for it, but pay the full cost. But if you're like me, I'm probably going to pick up that spork because it's cheaper. And so then cheaper or cleaner starts appearing truly cheaper than dirty made accountable. And that's replicated throughout the public store and every store and made worldwide through something called, now I'm getting really deep with you into policy, and this is again all on our website, is through something called a carbon border adjustment, where if we have a carbon tax here, we apply that tax on Chinese imports. They object in the World Trade Organization. You can't do that. That's an impermissible tariff. We think they lose that case based on cases in the chemical industry that say you can have a content tax. And so this would be a carbon content tax. So if we're right, and the World Trade Organization upholds our application of our tax to those Chinese imports, China 24 hours later would do the same carbon tax inside China, because otherwise they pay on entry to America a tax that enriches the American government. They could have collected that tax themselves, and the goods would come in with no adjustment. So that makes China follow our lead without any international agreement, without any bowing and scraping at the UN, without any protracted negotiations, just a bold move by the United States. And then the whole world is in, because China starts following, and then the rest of the world follows. And then literally on every shelf at Publix or any store, the spork, wooden spork, renewable cleaner, is cheaper than the petroleum-based or fossil fuel-based plastic fork. It's now made accountable, and it appears what it is, more expensive, actually. And then that's where innovation takes over, and that's the thing that you've been good to focus on here, Casey, is the ingenuity of the American people with new products coming to the shelves. Because, hey, now we can do these things renewable. They're cleaner, and they're cheaper once you make dirty accountable. We think that's really consistent with conservative thought, that it's just a basic principle that we should be accountable for our actions. And once you bring accountability, blessings flow.
Right.
Havoc results from the lack of accountability.
So Mr. Inglis, I've I got a Facebook page blown up with one of my conservative followers. Eric is, get government out of the way. If you can stop regulating, then innovation will take over. And, incentive versus innovation, he's very much for that. But then when you started talking about a tax, he's like, wait a minute, a wood fork because the government paid somebody to do it. Let the free market work it out. A tax. How is that conservative? And I know you were explaining, and I get it. If two products, one's environmentally friendly, one's going to help us with any kind of climate change, and then the other doesn't. If a consumer walks into Publix, they're going to either pick the cheaper product or pick the better one, even if they're about the same cost. So I understand that basis for a tax, but as a conservative, taxing an industry because the government chooses one over the other. How do you get there?
Very great question. And what I'd refer your listener to there is a great clip on our website. You can see it on the video tab at RepublicEn.org, where Milton Friedman, one of Ronald Reagan's economics advisors, was on the Phil Donahue show one time. It's a great little 2-minute clip. Phil Donahue, the liberal, says to Dr. Friedman, the very conservative economist, he says, what do you do about pollution? And Dr. Friedman, if you don't want to regulate it. Friedman says, you tax it. You tax pollution. And then he goes on to explain how it is that the government, and he says, yes, the government must step in when two people are doing something that affects a third person. And it's basically a concept, he doesn't go into this, but it's basically a concept of biblical accountability. Under Old Testament law, I can't do something on my property that harms you or your property. That's trespass. I'm hurting you by doing something on my property that harms you or your property. That became English common law and American common law. And so it's a basic concept of morality and a principle that conservatives generally follow. And that's what Dr. Friedman talks about, although he doesn't use the terms of morality, he uses just the terms of economics, that what you want to do is you got to step in and say, wait a minute, be accountable for that side effect. And what you'll find is that most economists, and I know in this age of political overstatement, that sounds like an overstatement, but honest to goodness, most economists would say the most efficient way to do that is to just tax carbon dioxide. Like Dr. Friedman would have said if he were still alive. In fact, we once had an event at the University of Chicago where he was, of course, the father of the Chicago School of Economics. And we asked the question, what would Milton Friedman do about climate change? And the Milton Friedman chair of economics told us he'd do a carbon tax, and because he's conservative, he'd insist on it being what's called revenue neutral, which means you would cut taxes somewhere else in equal amount, so there'd be no growth of government. And then he'd apply it to products coming in from other countries, so as to get the whole world in on it. And then you bring accountability worldwide for those side effects, and it's shown in every product. And then consumers, in the liberty of enlightened self-interest, pursue their self-interest. And that's when good things happen. Not because we told you at the Publix, no, you can't have that plastic fork. That's a regulatory answer. We'd say, listen, you want the plastic? Go ahead and buy it. Just pay the full cost of it, okay? Then you regulate your own appetites. If everybody's paying the true cost, good things happen because people do regulate their own appetites. If you have free goods, then a line forms and you get all kinds of inefficiencies. And so another video that might be helpful to that listener too, Casey, is also on our website, RepublicEn.org, under the video tab. There's a video of Art Laffer, another one of Ronald Reagan's economics advisors, of the Laffer curve, who says that, it just makes sense. Untaxed income. Put the tax on anything else. He says, carbon dioxide will do, but untaxed income, put the tax on something else. We think it's rock-solid conservatism. But we realize that we got to say that to fellow conservatives in a way that they haven't heard it before, because what they're afraid of is it's going to turn into big government. But it's actually a Milton Friedman small government solution.
Who do you find is supporting the carbon tax policy?
It's actual conservatives. It's people who know to sort of bow at the mention of Milton Friedman's name. The people who we have trouble with, Casey, are actually they're not really conservative. They're people who maybe aren't as steeped in what is actual conservatism. But conservatism, in my view, and Milton Friedman's view, if I could say, is that we should all be accountable for all of our actions. And if you follow that principle, good things happen. But here's the thing. Don't tax me out of existence. If you're going to change what you tax, say off or put a tax on carbon dioxide, then get off of some of my income. Don't be taxing that too, or reduce a tax somewhere else.
Don't just keep add tax upon tax, which seems to be what happens generally over the course of time.
What we're really talking here is a tax swap, off income on pollution.
Okay.
And if you do that, then good things happen.
We're running out of time here. I know I could talk another hour at least with you, but we have just 3 minutes left. The key to moving forward is young conservatives. Where do you see their involvement? And you spoke about your son at the beginning of this hour, very much kind of coming full circle here. That is our next generation. Where do you see them, helping with this entire issue with climate warming, climate change, and our reducing our carbon footprint?
Yeah, they're hugely important. Young conservatives want action on climate change as much as their young progressive friends do. And that has fully dawned on people like Kevin McCarthy, he who would be Speaker if Republicans take control of the House. And so Kevin, who is focused on the long term, because presumably he'd like to be Speaker for a long time, 22, 24, 26, right. 28. He'd like to be Speaker all those years. He's had a long-term view, and other people, especially like, for example, Donald Trump, who wants to maybe win just one more time, has a shorter time horizon. So if you're Kevin McCarthy, you see those young people, you see those young conservatives, you know they're coming, and you want to be their leader. And so that's why there's a little bit of friction right now between the long-term view and the short-term view in my party, the Republican Party. But I think that you're onto something, Casey. The young people will lead us to that long-term view, and that's why they're so powerful in this conversation about climate change.
Honestly, the young people are the power behind many changes that will be coming. They're the next generation to take up the causes that we are faced with today, and so important to get them involved with politics and in their community, not just politics, but in every asset of the life. We've been on the phone here with Mr. Bob Inglis. He's a former congressman from South Carolina and has started RepublicEn. RepublicEn.org is the website. There's so much more information on the website where you can find out what this organization is doing. It's a nonprofit 501c3, so you can certainly support them and get a tax write-off. But Mr. Inglis, thank you so much for joining us today. You've been very informative and appreciate all the work you're doing.
Well, thanks, Casey. So great to be with you.
Here as well, next week, we're going to have Dr. John Millay on. He's superintendent of Martin County School District, and it'll be another good show. I hope you can tune in next Wednesday starting at 10:05 a.m.